So speaking of side pressure, you talked about in your last podcast, you've changed up something a bit. Let's talk about the conjugate Westside Barbell System program.
Yeah,
Have,
so I'm
yeah,
I'm no expert, okay? Like, and I'm not gonna sit here and say that I'm like a scholar and a book reader. And Louis Simmons has a bunch of books out there. Todd sent me one. I have not read that book. However, I've studied up video wise, on some things in the conjugate. But mainly, I'm absorbing what Todd has taken the time to give me. So the conjugate method originated through a powerlifting team. I think there's a documentary out there on Westside Barbell and Louis Simmons and all the great things they did. And basically, it's a max effort day, like a 1 RM day, and a speed day, which has variations and cool stuff in it, a volume day, and an isometric day. And the way Todd does it and the way he recommends it is like 4 to 6 exercises where you cycle through. Um, the volume and intensity, if you're doing it at the percentages they want, is really, really taxing on the central nervous system. So it took a little bit to get used to, especially because, I'm one of those people who I'm always trying to do more than everybody else rather than necessarily thinking about efficiency. So I'm training total body and I'm training arm wrestling specific with a ton of volume, but not always that level of maximum intensity. So what I found with that approach is it took some getting used to. Obviously, the areas that you would assume you're going to have pain in, your elbow and your shoulder, all that side pressure, is where I felt it early on. But Todd's also a believer in multiple days a week on the table, which I have also done for this prep. So 2 to 3 days a week on the table, plus that. What it's forced me to do is cut down on the volume that I'm doing for general strength. So if one of my workouts in the past, they would look like anywhere from 5 to 7 exercises, tiered from like a core strength lift down to auxiliary stuff, and 3 to 5 sets on all of those. And in between each one of those sets, it supersetted in an arm wrestling specific exercise. So I was getting all this crazy amount of volume, but that's because, once I got out of that first core lift, my intensity level dropped. Now with the conjugate method and, 6 to 7 sets of this really, really high intensity arm wrestling specific stuff where I'm almost blacking out half the time.
yeah,
It's
it's
forced me to
yeah,
pare that general strength stuff down to maybe 3 to 4 exercises. But in those exercises, I have to match that overall intensity. So the workouts they haven't gone longer, but I've had to split them up into double days, and I've also had to pare down that overall general strength stuff because of the intensity and the taxing of the central nervous system. So it's interesting. It's hard. It's really hard for me to say where I'm at right now because I'm pulling 2 and 3 times a week on the table, and I'm not necessarily pulling like any huge strength barometer guys where I can tell like where I'm at. But what I can say is surprisingly that shoulder and elbow that's bearing all that burden in that side pressure training, those things feel really good. Like they have conditioned themselves. And Todd always talks about making your elbows bulletproof. I don't know if, 12, 14 weeks is enough to make them bulletproof, but I can say that my 1 rep maxes are up in almost every movement close to 10%. So I that may sound like a lot to some people. It may sound like a little bit, but I feel like I feel much more comfortable in certain positions on the table because. So the litmus test will be May 10th. That'll
yeah,
be the way we find out.
yeah. I think that this system, I've heard only good things about it. Not it's not for everyone, but I think that it has created champions. So, it's a good experiment, I think, for you to try it out. And if you've seen,
Right.
improvement, that means it's working. And on May 10th, we will see whether
Well, see,
it's
I've kind of committed myself to it too. So
yeah,
regardless of the outcome of this match, I'm going to stay committed to it for a longer period of time because I do believe a lot of like Todd made a great point. He said most notable arm wrestlers in North America that are still active, Michael Todd and Devin Larry. He said, what uh, what does their training look like over the past 10 years? I said, well, it's definitely changed. You know, this is what it looks like right now. And he's like, you can stop at what you just said. It's 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 changed throughout the time.
yeah,
And he said, my training has not changed. It has been conjugate method the whole time, just cycling different exercises for different opponents. And here I am at 58 years old, and I can say that I'm still getting better for sure because it's measurable.
yeah,
So you can do what they're doing and try and figure it out, or you can do what I'm doing and trust me that I already did.
yeah.
So
It's yeah.
he makes a really good case for it.
Yeah, it's a process of trying things out and see what works for you, and you go from there then, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So